Ever get that feeling? Like you think you know something and then bam, it turns out to be way more interesting and complex than you imagined.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what we're in for today with Afrikaans. We're diving deep, and trust me, it's not just going to be some basic language lesson.
Right. It's definitely a journey. We're talking about history, culture, how people communicate, the whole shebang.
And, we've got these excerpts from podcast-input.txt. And one thing's for sure, this whole idea of Afrikaans being just simplified Dutch goes right out the window.
Yeah, that's way too simple.
I mean, sure, there's Dutch in there, obviously, but the influences, they go way beyond that.
It really is fascinating how it all comes together, this sort of tapestry. You see the Dutch threads, no doubt, but then you've got the indigenous languages, the Khoisan languages, and then layer on top of that the Malay influence brought over, unfortunately, through the slave trade,
right,
and even some Portuguese in there. It's really quite something.
It's like one of those fusion dishes, You wouldn't expect all those ingredients to work together, but somehow it creates this amazing flavor you wouldn't get any other way. And the best part is you can taste those different flavors in the language itself. Like take the word for banana. In Afrikaans, it's pisang, straight from Malay. You won't find that in your Dutch textbook.
Not at all. And that just goes to show how African is. It's not just borrowing words here and there. It's taking these different elements from its surroundings and really making them its own.
Yeah.
It's this real fusion, a unique blend you wouldn't find anywhere else. And, it wasn't just about, like you said, grabbing words. It's about how cultures mix together, how people actually talk to each other. That's what shapes how a language is really structured, deep down.
Yeah, it's like this linguistic dance floor.
Yeah.
With each culture bringing its own moves. And then somehow they all blend together to create this totally new dance that's Afrikaans. But as it was finding its own rhythm, it was bound to bump up against the way things were, the established order, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Imagine being told that the way you talk, the language you use to express yourself, to tell stories, connect with your people, that it's somehow less than not as good as another language.
Right.
That struggle for recognition, it's a sad but common thread through history, isn't it?
It really is, and that's a huge part of the Afrikaans story. This language, once dismissed, and I love this, as Kitchen Dutch, somehow makes this incredible journey to become an official language of South Africa.
Alongside Dutch, no less. That was in the early 1900s. Quite a turnaround.
It really is. But it's also where things get a little, complicated.
Definitely.
Because this official recognition, it's a victory, right? But it also gets tangled up with the rise of Afrikaner nationalism at the time.
Right. It sets the stage for this, let's just say it's a complicated relationship with history, with some dark moments.
Yeah, there's no ignoring the shadow of apartheid. It's there. But we also have to acknowledge the other side, the richness of the culture, the way the language itself is moving beyond that difficult past.
I think that's key. It's like to really grasp the African story, we've got to dig into what makes it unique linguistically. And one of the things that pops up right away is the double negative.
Double negative.
Yeah. Might sound strange to some, but it's classic Afrikaans grammar. It's part of what makes it stand out.
Yeah. So instead of like, I don't need help, it's I don't need no help.
Exactly.
See, that's fascinating because in English, we'd say that's just wrong grammatically.
And that's what's so cool about it. The double negative really makes you question this whole idea of correct grammar. It shows how these so-called rules, they're not set in stone. What's normal in one language might sound totally off in another. And in Afrikaans, the double negative, it's not just acceptable. It adds a layer of meaning that often gets lost in translation.
Makes you think twice about taking our own language for granted.
Yeah.
Like we see that double negative and boom, instantly think wrong. Yeah. But in Afrikaans, it's totally normal, grammatically sound. Shows you how much we just absorb these rules without even realizing.
Right. Absolutely. Like it challenges our whole system, doesn't it? And this idea, right, that the language you speak actually shapes how you think. That's huge. Linguistic relativity, they call it. Really key to getting Afrikaans, I think.
Okay, so we've got this whole double negative thing going on, but our notes mention verbs in Afrikaans are a whole other story. Something about not having separate infinitives.
Right, right. So in most cases, the infinitive form, like to speak, for example, and the present tense, I speak, they're the same in Afrikaans.
Whoa, so you just use one word for both?
Pretty much. Different from English and a lot of other languages, that's for sure.
So streamlined, like it's cutting out the extra step.
Exactly. It's more efficient, wouldn't you say? And it's one of those things that makes Afrikaans its own thing, not just a copycat of other languages.
It's making me want to hear it in action, see how it all flows together. But we can't just gloss over the heavy stuff. I mean, we've talked about the cool, unique stuff in Afrikaans, but there's the history too, specifically apartheid. I mean, it's right there in our research, like the Soweto uprising. Students protesting, having Afrikaans forced on them in schools. It's a powerful example of how language can be used as a tool, a way to control people, sadly.
Yeah, that's the thing with language, isn't it? It's powerful stuff. The Soweto uprising is a stark reminder of that, how it can be used to marginalize, to really hurt people. Can't separate that from the language itself, even if we admire it from a purely linguistic point of view.
It's a heavy responsibility. It's not just communication. It's about who has the power and how they use it. And it makes what's happening now with Afrikaans culture even more inspiring. I mean, despite all that, it's thriving. Our notes mention a resurgence, particularly among younger people. Music, literature, the whole nine yards. Like they're taking their language back, reshaping it.
It speaks to that resilience, language can adapt, and Afrikaans, it carries that weight of history, sure, but it's also full of potential. I mean, the potential for change, for people to express themselves in new ways. It's exciting.
It makes you wonder, right, about the future of Afrikaans. Will it always have that connection to apartheid, that painful past, or can it break free, create something new?
It's a tough question. The speakers, the people who use the language every day, they're the ones who will ultimately decide that. But what we are seeing is this movement to embrace the diversity within Afrikaans, that vibrancy it has. And that's promising, isn't it?
It's a pretty amazing cycle when you think about it. Born out of this fusion of cultures, then facing adversity, oppression, and still it finds a way to come back stronger, reimagined by a new generation.
Exactly, a continuous cycle. And that's what makes this whole deep dive, this exploration of Afrikaans, more than just a linguistics lesson. It's history, culture, the human experience, all wrapped up in one.
And speaking of wrapping up, we haven't even touched on how Afrikaans sounds. I mean, the pronunciation. Did you know that the G sound, it's got like a bunch of different pronunciations depending on the word?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's got that guttural thing going on, totally different from how we'd usually say it.
Like that Dutch word, morgen, for tomorrow. In Afrikaans, it's like this G from the back of your throat almost. So cool.
Exactly. Languages, they change their sounds over time. And often it's because of the other languages around them influencing them. It's really quite amazing.
See, that's what I love about these deep dives, these little fascinating details you never even think about, like a whole hidden world inside the language itself. But okay, I have a confession. All this talk about double negatives and GS from the back of the throat, I'm realizing I know nothing, really, about the nitty-gritty of language. Like even just how it's written, Afrikaans have those little marks above some letters, right? Diacritics, they're called.
Yes, diacritics. Crucial in Afrikaans. They tell you how to pronounce things. Without them, you might see two words that look the same, but they sound totally different. They make all the difference.
Like little signposts, guiding your pronunciation.
Exactly. Think of them like musical notes, right? Take away the notes, and you still have sound, but it wouldn't have that same depth, that detail. Diacritics in Afrikaans, they unlock the full picture, the subtleties of how it should sound.
Such a good analogy. And it reminds me of what we were saying before, that language is about more than just the words on the page. You need to listen to the rhythm, look for the little clues, even appreciate the diacritics, those little marks, to truly understand it. It's about experiencing the whole package, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny, we think about language and it's like, okay, we use it to talk to each other, right?
Right.
But this whole deep dive, it's really showing just how much more is packed into language than just words, It's history, it's who we are, even how we fight for change, it's all in there.
It's amazing, isn't it? How much one word can carry. The meaning, the baggage, depending on where it comes from, what's happened around it. Afrikaans is like a case study,
Totally. So, looking back on all this, what do you think? What can we take away from this whole Afrikaans thing about language in general, about ourselves?
Well, I think one thing that sticks out is that language, it never sits still. What people might have dismissed once, seen as less than, it can become a symbol, like with Afrikaans becoming an official language. And then, of course, that gets challenged, too. It's constantly shifting.
It's like this living thing, always being rewritten by the people using it. Makes you realize we've got to be careful, right? Mindful of what we say, how it can affect things.
I couldn't agree more. Every word, it's got a past, a whole story behind it. And we can use those words to bring people together or to push them apart. Understanding that, that's huge, I think. Helps us move through the world with a bit more awareness, a bit more heart.
Absolutely. So it's more than just, I learned a few new words today. It's like this window into how people work, how cultures work.
Exactly. It pushes us to look beyond our own little bubbles, to appreciate all the ways people express themselves, even if it's different from what we're used to.
Makes you want to keep learning, doesn't it?
Mm.
So as we wrap this up, any last words for our listeners? Maybe got them feeling inspired to dive into a new language.
I'd say be curious. Don't be scared to explore languages that seem totally foreign at first. You never know what you'll discover, what hidden beauty you might find.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So there we have it. Afrikaans, from kitchen Dutch to this language wrestling with its past, trying to find its place in the world. What a journey.
It reminds us that language is alive, changing right along with us.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If language is a reflection of who we are, what does your language say about you? That's all for this deep dive. Catch you next time.